What's up everyone, Alex here. So a few weeks ago, I posted a request on the channel's community tab asking you to post any gaming questions that you'd like me to answer. And I want to say that I absolutely loved answering those questions, and I actually have a dedicated video answering almost all of them. But there was one particular question by GrayMars1097 that I wanted to save for this video, because he's asking a very relevant question, especially now that we're approaching Black Friday, which is there any actual reason to buy a PS5? Now, I think this is a multifaceted question that I can't just answer based off of my experience. After all, we're all coming from different economic backgrounds and limitations, and so I felt the best way to do it is to approach it from my perspective and also the perspective of our community as a whole. If you're brand new to the channel, you notice that the kind of games we talk about are very different than what the mainstream actually covers. And it's because of that I felt like that this video had to be targeted towards them. That being said, I also want to address some of the more important questions, like for example exclusives that are on the platform, because those are also super important to answer for anybody considering a brand new console. To start it all off, I want to talk about how I got my PS5, because the circumstance how I got my PS5 is very, very different than a lot of people's out there. In fact, it's probably quite rare. Hey guys, post-production Alex here, and I wanted to add something to this and say that the reason why I'm sharing the story isn't because I want to brag how I got my PS5, it's to underscore the fact that because of the way that I acquired my PS5, I'm going to have a very different perspective than somebody who walks into a store and actually buys a PS5, or actually somebody who's been saving for it for a very long time. So I just want to put this here as a caveat. Anyways, take it away on camera, Alex. So the story starts in 2020, the beginning of 2020, when I decided to start using Adobe Photoshop and pay monthly. And bear with me for a moment here. I'm one of those people who is usually reluctant in paying for subscription services, but the kinds of new features that I get with every single update on Photoshop felt it was worth it for me to actually pay it monthly. And the fact that the channel finally is able to support it, I figured, why the heck not? So months pass and Adobe sends me this little tiny survey, and in the survey they said oh, we're gonna enter you into a raffle. If you just fill in the survey, you may win an Amazon gift card. So I was like, all right, I know what you're doing. Why not? Let's try it. You know, it's a very short survey. Let's do it. A month later, I get a $500 Amazon gift card that just blew me away. I was like, I didn't even know how much this was going to be, and I'm just really shocked. Needless to say, I got the exact $500 I needed for a disc-based PS5, and once the pre-orders opened, I completely used it for that. And keep in mind, I live in a state that does not have sales tax, so that $500 is $500. And pretty much when the console came out, the rest is history. I got a PS5. Now, as I said, that circumstance is quite rare. Not many people actually win raffles or drawings and whatnot and get $500 out of the air. That being said, I'd been saving money for a new PlayStation ever since the PS4 launched. What I actually did was I saved $2 per week from the PS4 launch up until the PS5's launch, and now I'm actually able to afford another PS5 if I wanted to. And by the way, you can do that right now. I know that we don't know when the next PlayStation's gonna be, but saving a couple of bucks a week doesn't sound too bad, and over time it just kind of accumulates, right? Just a tip for folks who are trying to figure out how to save for the next console or are thinking of skipping this one. So given the fact that I've had my PS5, I think it's about time to actually talk about what I like and not like about it. Let's start with the negatives. This is pretty obvious because this is something that all console manufacturers do, which is your paid themes and of course pre-order themes don't carry over at all. And that's just a reality of the situation. If you ever purchased any sort of incompatible avatar or a theme from previous generations, you just can't get that back on the PS5 or any future console. That's the reality of it. This next one isn't necessarily a huge complaint, But it's something that I was thinking about because when you buy a console, you're not necessarily just using it to pay for the console you're getting, you're also paying for the future research and development of the next console. And that is the guide functionality of the PS5 isn't really used a lot except for first parties. In case you've forgotten, the guide functionality is a feature that allows developers to make spoiler-free guides for the games that they make that's built into the PS5 console. When this was first released, I couldn't help but approach it with a realist perspective of, okay, so let me get this straight. Video game development is already super expensive, labor-intensive, and take a long time. Now you're asking developers to basically do the work that a lot of many hardworking FAQ makers have done over the past few years and add more cost to the game itself. Because guess what? Those guides aren't going to get made for free. And they're also video-based too, so you need to hire a video editor, maybe you need to hire a narrator, all these things. And with game development constantly shuffling levels, deleting levels, adding new levels at the last minute, it's like as though they forgot the other problems developers had in favor of this feature that not a lot of people used. And again, this is not a big deal, but it's something to consider that it's a feature that is barely even used. I don't know about this next point because it only seems to be happening to me, and I've asked so many other PS5 owners, and it's not happening to them, which is my DualSense controller's batteries are decaying really fast. Battery decay is a real thing. What that does is the more you charge a controller, the more the charge actually gets shorter and shorter and shorter. The DualSense controller that was packed in with my PS5 can only hold a charge of about less than 10 to 15 minutes now. Like literally today, before I started recording this video, my DualSense controller couldn't even stay on for like 10 minutes. Literally just watching a YouTube video from a full battery, it just can't turn on. Like I was literally like mashing the PlayStation logo to try to turn off my PlayStation 5, and it is literally a race for that thing to turn off. Now, I wish this incident was only isolated with my DualSense that came packed with the PS5. We bought an extra controller 2 years ago, and that one can only last for about a little over an hour. Not even the full 3 to 6 hours that people were estimating it at. And I'm just like, what is going on? Now, again, I asked a bunch of people about this, and it's not happening to them. But I gotta say that it's really annoying to note that the PlayStation 5 controller isn't as robust as the PlayStation 4's DualShock. I mean, I still have my DualShock from the launch back in 2013, and it is still working. The next thing I want to talk about is the no game closed notification. This is huge for me because my wife and I play video games a lot. So how does this work? Let's say I am playing Star Ocean: The Second Story R for a second time, with Claude this time. And my wife decides that she wants to check out Tales of Arise Beyond the Dawn, the new Tales of Arise DLC. When she starts that game, she does not get a notification saying another game is running in the background. And if your game does not have autosaves or any way to, I don't know, save their state or whatever, it's just gonna get closed completely with no warning. Now, this is different from the Series Xboxes in that they actually have like a quick resume function that saves the memory state up to 2 to 3 games, depending on how big the games are. But on the PlayStation, there's absolutely nothing like that. It'll just close the previous application and that's it. In fact, what's really frustrating about this is that there is no visual indicator that tells you that the game is still running, unlike the PS4. And as you know, the PS4 already had this feature, so for Sony to forget to put this on the PS5 seems really odd. And I think of every single thing on this negative list, that's probably my biggest deal, is the no game closed notification. And here's an FYI, because they just announced the new Slim PS5s. The new Slim disc-based PS5, when you buy the disc drive, you have a $30 extra surcharge if you want to upgrade to the disc drive. So essentially, the entire cost of a discless PS5 and the disc drive is going to be $530. In which case, I would just recommend trying to get a disc-based PS5 at that point. It's cute to have a digital-only PS5, but you can use that $30 towards an actual game. Okay, so that's a decent amount of negatives. How about the positives? First off, because it's a more powerful piece of hardware, it has obvious performance pluses, like faster loading, higher resolution graphics, higher quality textures. Some of the games will use a lot more space, but for the most part, it just runs really well. I'm actually happy to be playing the PS5 versions of games because they just look and perform really well. I don't have to worry about long loading times, which helps with my review process because I can get through games a lot quicker, and it's just a joy to really play games without having to worry about things like, I don't know, the PS4 fan turning on because the PS5 is so silent. And yes, you still have to occasionally clean that fan, but until then, it just runs super silent. It doesn't sound like you're playing in a room where there's like an aircraft engine that's about to start up or something like that. It's just constantly quiet, which is great. And again, higher resolution, better loading times, and better graphics. I mean, I think that's a good thing to have. And to a similar point, a lot of PS4 games actually have free upgrades to the PS5. Now, you've probably heard Sony charge a surplus for PS5 versions of their games, but thankfully everybody else isn't doing that. Now, the quote-unquote everybody else will vary, of course, from game to game because it'll depend on whether or not it's a AAA game or a game that is cross-platform, but that's something that we'll have to pay attention to on a case-by-case basis. And given our community and what we like, a lot of JRPGs have free PS5 upgrades, so you can easily take advantage of this. Along the same lines, these free PS5 upgrades also have the ability to convert your PS4 save so that you can play it on the PS5 version. Now, that is a huge boon, especially if you had a long progression on the PS4 version and you just got your PS5 and you're like, I want to play this on a more powerful console, and some games will allow you to do that. Now, the catch-22 is that once you convert your save, you can't actually convert it back to the PS4. So you have to make sure that that's actually something that you want to do. But chances are, 9 out of 10, a lot of people who convert their saves from the PS4 to the PS5 are just going to play it on PS5 anyway. So earlier when I talked about the performance benefits of the PS5, I didn't really underscore the fact that PS4 games benefit from it as well. Well, any sort of PS4 game that's installed in the internal PS5 SSD also get to take advantage of the faster loading. Now, again, this is a case-by-case basis per game, but it's fairly significant over time. This is one of those things that cumulatively your game time is going to get shorter and shorter and shorter because of the constant loading and the shorter loading. And I think this is actually a really good thing to notice. And of course, there are specific PS4 games that get even more enhanced. First-party games are included in this, and somebody has a list of every single PS4 game that takes advantage of the PS5. Like somehow these PS4 games can detect the PS5, and they just run much better in terms of frame rate and higher resolution, which is actually really, really cool. The last part is similar to the last part that I had with the negatives, but I think this is rather important to mention, which is the extra storage for the PS5 is getting significantly cheaper. So check this out. Last year, around February, I bought a 2 terabyte SSD for about $290. Guess how much that same SSD costs now? $139. Which is $151 less last year. That is a really good indication that SSDs are finally dropping in price significantly. And that's good news not just for PS5 owners, but also for PC gamers who wanted to get higher capacity SSD drives. So this is just good news overall for everybody. So you're probably thinking to yourself, okay, Alex, you have outlined the negatives and you've outlined the positives. But really, the most important thing about buying a new console are the games. Now, what do I think about the exclusives? To answer that question, I feel the need to address it using the channel. I can honestly say that the choice of games that I feature on this channel are mostly based off of my interest level. So nobody is telling me like, oh, you need to make videos on JRPGs and all these niche titles. No one's actually telling me that. Any game that you see featured on Backlog Battle is just something that I simply want to play period, end of story, regardless of my opinions on them. That being said, if you've been a long-time fan of the channel, you notice that there's a serious lack of PlayStation 5 exclusives being talked about. That being said, I can say that I actually really truly enjoyed my time with Final Fantasy XVI, which I did review and make a couple of videos based off of, as well as my time with Horizon Forbidden West, which I didn't really talk about on the channel, but I did talk about it with people on my Discord. And of course, I have God of War Ragnarok sitting in the wings waiting for me to play it someday. But the bottom line is that I find myself not caring too much about the exclusives on the PS5 than a typical mainstream gamer, for the particular reason that I really truly enjoy a lot of the JRPGs and Japanese games that I'm playing, and also indies too. Let's lump indies in there as well, because they're delivering something very different than what the AAA games are actually offering. That's not to say that AAA games are terrible or anything like that, and we should avoid them. That's not what I'm saying here. I'm saying that for me, I really like Octopath Traveler, I really like Star Ocean, I really like all the Square Enix games that came out last year, all the indies like Chained Echoes and Sea of Stars and Eternites. I just love those kinds of games. It's in that sense that I'm actually playing games on my PS5 that are multi-platform, games that are actually still on the PS4 and the Switch, which honestly, most likely a lot of you already have. There was an ESA survey a few years ago that asked how many consoles exist in a particular household, and a lot of them answered 2. And what that told me is that the likelihood that somebody has both a Switch and a PS4 is actually very, very high in today's day and age. Now, it could be 2 PS4s or 2 Switches. I don't really know. But the fact that it said that households in the United States had at least 2 consoles per household is a big deal, because this idea that households only have 1 console is far gone. People have at least a PS4 or a Switch and an Xbox, or a PS4 and an Xbox, any sort of combination, including the same console twice. And I think it's very important to note that, because if those consoles still exist in these households and you don't really care for the exclusives, why would you ever consider upgrading to the next generation? And given the JRPG genre in general, they're really slow to adapt to next generation hardware. In fact, if you think about the upcoming games next year, of course, Final Fantasy VII Rebirth is coming out only on PS5, and it's probably time locked on that for a good period of time. But then you see something like Persona 3 Reload, which is coming out on multiple platforms, not just the new current gen, like of the PS5 and the Xbox Series. And also, Like a Dragon Infinite Wealth, which is one of the most anticipated JRPGs next year, is also still coming out on the PS4. So again, why do you need to upgrade to the next gen? Now, don't get me wrong, I'm not advocating and saying like, oh, you should avoid next gen completely. What I'm really trying to say here is that the reasons for buying the PS5 is really going to differ from person to person. Now, I practically got the PS5 for free. I mean, that's crazy, right? So my opinion on having a PS5 is going to be different compared to somebody who has to save for a PS5. But I think with this video, I've given you enough things to ponder for yourself to figure out whether it is worth upgrading. And honestly, I think it's just going to be based off of the games that you want to play. If you're the kind of person who only plays JRPGs and maybe some of the classics, then a PS5 doesn't make sense to you. On the other hand, if you want to play games like Baldur's Gate 3 and you don't have a PC, or Spider-Man 2, which is exclusive to the PS5, then a PS5 is something that you have to consider. And here's the thing, trying to think of the future and whether or not these things get ported to other platforms, or whether you're gonna buy a PC next year, 2 years from now, or whatever, is inconsequential to now. You have to make the decision right now whether or not you would much rather put that money onto a PC or a next-gen PS5. Because we're already in year 4 of the PS5. So we're kind of in the middle of this generation, and we're gonna start transitioning to a new generation in about maybe 4 years' time. That being said, there are other PlayStation 5 owners who are watching right now who probably have very strong opinions of their purchase, and I want to hear from you. What are the best exclusive PS5 games that you've played? Are you a Japanese RPG or Japanese game connoisseur? And how has the PS5 changed the way that you play those games? And if you're considering buying a PS5 right now, I would like you to ask your questions in the comments below so that we can all answer it, because I think it's worth discussing. And with the holidays coming around the corner and Cyber Monday and Black Friday coming in, I want to be able to give you a really good answer depending on what your needs are and the kinds of games that you play. So again, post your comment below and let's talk about it. Thank you very much for watching, everyone, and I'll see you in the next video.